Welcome back, nerds. Fino here with a servant guide from Murasaki Shikibu. She's a 5-star caster introduced with Valentine's 4 and a smoking hot right as servant. Know what that means? It's time for my wallet to pay for its crimes. Again. Fair warning, you're going to see fewer teams on this video since Murasaki is more of a flexible pick in my opinion than someone you build your team around. I'll show you a few examples, but they're the exception and not the norm. They may also be memes. The most practical Murasaki-focused team is one for loop farming. She has 2 traits that really lend herself to this role. First is her second skill, Curse Poem. It's a 30% self-charge that increases her NP damage for 3 turns. Also has a chance to NP seal, which is more relevant for other applications. Depending on your setup, you can end up with some pretty awkward refund amounts, so having 30% available on demand is pretty nice, though I find 30% a bit underwhelming for a 5-star caster. You might have to give up a turn of NP damage, but first waves tend to be pushovers anyway. Her second big attribute, alright, third if you want to count the obvious, is her Noble Phantasm. Tale of Genji, Aoi Evil Spirit is a 6-hit AoE arts attack that applies buff block for 1 turn. It also does extra damage to demonic enemies tied to overcharge. 6 hits is pretty damn good. For reference, Surfer Mordred has 5 hits. With Castoria, looping is a no-brainer, but Murasaki can do it even before the Castoria meta becomes a thing. You'll have to mix and match things like Paracelsus, Nero Bride, and Tamama with various mystic codes to make it happen, but it is doable and without too much fussing. The one downside is that, as a caster, her damage tends to be a bit weak. At NP1 especially, you may find looping much easier than actually killing your targets, especially if they aren't demonic. Most assassin servants aren't, so if you aren't dumpstering Shuten, expect a fight on your hands. Utility-wise, buff block on an Arts Noble Phantasm has all kinds of abuse potential. On boss fights that you can loop, you can lock them out of their buffs indefinitely, which is pretty funny. Doubly so against enemies with steroid NPs. That's right, we're at the meme team already. A large part of Murasaki's kit centers on its anti-demonic attributes. We saw this on her NP, but her first skill, Great Poet's Poem, also plays into this. It's an AoE defense reduction that also gives an anti-demon buff to your frontline. Now for the record, stacking special buffs like this tends to be less effective than mixing buff types, but we can still have some fun with this. Curiously enough, 2 other Raito servants have anti-demonic properties. Both Zerk, Raiko, and Caster Shuten have personal buffs on a skill, and some vague synergy in the sense that they can take these buffs and convert them into big damage. Truth be told, the practical use of Great Poet's Poem is to give the buff to someone who's missing a special attack modifier. For instance, Caster and Pollux, Lancer Melt, whoever you want to be your main damage dealer for a fight. Murasaki is very flexible in this way, especially if you consider her third skill, the Diary of Lady Murasaki. This gives party-wide damage reduction, debuff immunity, and buff removal resistance. Those last 2 are niche on their own, but they're extremely useful in those niches. Having them both on a single skill is a lot of value. It is one of those things where the results are binary. Either you shit on your opponent's gimmick, or it's largely useless. But at the same time, you don't have to run Murasaki as a core member of your teams. You can slot her in at your leisure if you need anti-demonic buffs, another piece of utility, or both. Her craft essence options reflect this flexibility. Attacking builds can go with high charge picks like Kaleidoscope and max limit Broken Imaginary Element, things that let her NP immediately. Magical Girl of Sapphire plays into her looping build, Golden Sumo can help her damage issues depending on your support loadout, and Castoria setups in particular can abuse Black Grail freely, relying on Murasaki's high hit count to compensate for the lack of starting charge. Supportive builds can pick whatever CE fits the situation, but I find Golden Catches the Carp generally useful. It's a star dump for your main attacker, but it also lets her get in range for her own NP if the fight drags, killing small fry and buying time with her buff block. Finally, there's her Bond CE. While she's on the front line, everyone gets 20% more damage against demonic enemies. Unique effects like this are cool, but given her kit, it seems a bit redundant. Even against demonics, I'd probably go with Golden Catches the Carp anyway. My opinion is that you'd have to be fighting a huge number of demonic enemies for an extended period of time for it to make sense. For command codes, the one I'd really recommend is Everyone's Da Vinci-chan, which isn't coming till way later in Scatfest. It increases party NP damage when you attack with the card in question. You could get mileage out of it, especially in support builds. As a curiosity, you've also got a few anti-demonic command codes, one of which features Murasaki herself. Ironically, I wouldn't put it on her since, like Murasaki, you tailor its deployment to specific fights, and in my assessment, you do that by skipping the middleman and just putting it on your single target attacker. So how's Murasaki as a whole? Well, she's not an essential attacker or support, but she's quite strong in both roles. Her kit gives her a lot of flexibility, letting her operate as both a looping farmer and a utility character. FGO has no shortage of demonic enemies, so she's got job security in that regard. For challenging content, she actually has a lot of useful traits that can be hard to find on broadly useful servants. Buff purge resistance, debuff immunity, and buff block are outstanding pieces of utility. Combine this with her anti-demonic buff, and she can glue a number of janky setups together. Of course, this does come with the flaw that Murasaki has no hard mitigation, so she needs to be babysat, which isn't ideal for challenge quests. But I guess you can't have everything. Another problem is that, as a farmer, Chengong sorta eats into her niche, though he plays very differently. Depending on your playstyle, you can find applications for both. In conclusion, I'd say Murasaki is technically situational, but it's the kind of situational that covers a huge number of use cases. You just have to be a bit clever about it. You don't ram the Murasaki-shaped peg into a square hole. Once you get that down, I think you'll find Murasaki a strong and rewarding character, though admittedly not an essential one. Thanks for watching. Like if you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more, and come watch me on Twitch where I stream every weekend, 3 p.m. Pacific time, Friday through Sunday. Sunday. That's when I'll be rolling for the other 4 copies of Murasaki, and I expect it to be an absolute disaster. Come hang out. You won't want to miss it.